We do have a very special guest today, and I'm so glad he could be here. He's been a friend of mine for a long time, and as you all know, he's Speaker of the House of Representatives for just a little while longer. But he's here to speak to us today, and please give him a good Northwest Oklahoma welcome. You all know who he is, so I didn't say his name.
We know his mom and dad.
Yeah.
I didn't know if Lynn was getting up to leave or a standing ovation, but turns out it was neither. Well, it is. It's good to be back. I'm going to move that chair. That's all right. And fitting to be back. I remember a lot of Sundays coming to lunch with my parents. I'm glad my parents got to come. I don't get to do these very often, and so this will ensure that everything that is reported is accurate and straight down the middle, so you can make your own decisions. If they're here, I can't put any spin on anything. But a lot of Sundays coming here to the Colonial House when this place first opened to eat lunch, and then. Oh gosh, 12 years ago, Randy, we were here for a watch party on election night and with family, and a lot of you were here that night. The guy that wore that Tacoma baseball jersey back in the 40s was standing here as well, and a lot's changed in 12 years, but it's kind of fitting as I guess the farewell tour in my last month in office to be back here again in this same place, in a special place that means a lot. So thank you, Pat, very much for the invitation. Fred's right. Did Fred leave? Oh, he's staying. All right, Fred's staying.
I thought about it, but I stayed.
As you all know, our law enforcement officials, and particularly OSBI, has been a bit busy this last week with what happened in Wellston and Sayre and the manhunt that's ongoing unless something's changed in the last little bit. But I called Fred's son Steve, who's an inspector with the OSBI. Many of you probably know Steve. And I was on my way home from the Capitol last night. It was a little before 10 o'clock, and he was in his office working on another report. And what a great job those guys do. And Steve's a near and dear friend. I get to see him a lot in the Capitol. Does great work with all of our law enforcement, but Steve in particular. And I just wanted to pass that.
How old were you when you did that speech at the church?
That'd have been 8th grade. Might have been 8th grade. I was taller then. I had more hair, and it wasn't gray. Amazing.
I could get to that.
Yeah. I don't know if it's politics or teenage daughters or what brings that on, but something happens. So, Pat asked me today to talk about the state questions, and I will do that. I just want to mention, though, my term will end at midnight on November 22nd, so we're really in the less than a month now of that 12 years of service, and it's been a real privilege and one I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to do that. 12 years is a long enough sentence, so I'm ready to be paroled as well, but it's been an honor to represent this part of the state. Never dreamed I'd have a chance to have Northwest Oklahoma represented at the table in the Speaker's office and hopefully bring our values and ideas to decisions made at the state capitol. And it's been a challenging last several years. We know we're an energy state. We know we'll have busts and booms. You just hope when you're in the legislature that's not when one of those busts occur, and you really hope it doesn't happen while you're the Speaker of the House. But it presents challenges, and you're not able to maybe do everything you wanted to do. But at the same time, it maybe is equally as important to make sure that bad things don't happen in those situations as well. And my hope is that we've done that in a way that this district can be proud of. Was an interesting day yesterday. One of the last things that I will do before leaving office, if they get it to us, the CRB, the review board, will have to review, which the board is made up of the governor and the Speaker of the House and the President Pro Tem of the Senate, will have to review the new agreement with SSM, or St. Anthony's, and University of Oklahoma and OU Medicine. And obviously that has an impact on this community, being a St. Anthony affiliate as well, and what all that may mean. It was a meeting yesterday, a news conference. The President was here from St. Louis of SSM, and I'm really anxious to see the details of that. It's something that's been in the works for a couple of years now, and I think it may be very positive for our state and for this community as well. But it will be interesting to see as that unfolds the next year, what that means. And it will be interesting to see if Ed Sutter indeed would be treated at OU Medical Center Alba. I mean, it'll be interesting to see whether he
That would be pretty soon.
Well, again, Pat asked me to run through the state questions, and I'll try to do that. And there are 7 of them, and just give you some background information and some general information. And I really didn't intend to come to lobby you to vote yes or no on any particular question, but hopefully just to give you the facts that you can make informed decisions with the best information that I have at my fingertips to provide. And so I'll just run through these. And I actually brought copies of them, but I left them out in my pickup. If you want to run out and get them, they're in a folder in the back. And probably everyone has a copy, but I have copies of the actual questions. But I'll just go through them in numeric order, and if we get done in time and there's questions, I'll be happy to answer those so that we can hopefully get through all 7 of them. Some of these state questions were put on the ballot, 4 of the 7 by the legislature. The legislature voted, the House and Senate. The governor has no role in that. The House and Senate can submit things to the vote of the people and go around the governor. That's how that was intended to do. Doesn't necessarily mean the governor's for or against these items. It's just our process is the legislature can send things directly to a vote of the people from the governor, which is how this was designed. And then 3 questions were placed on the ballot by petition drive. That was an initiative petition that was done, signatures gathered and determined to be the proper number. There was an additional question on marijuana that did get enough signatures, but not in time to get on this ballot. So that will be on the next statewide ballot, likely to be in 2 years, unless there's something that happens that causes an election to occur between now and then. But that will not be on your ballot November 8th. One other word of advice. If there was ever a year to try to go to the courthouse and vote early, this might be one. The courthouse, you can vote Thursday, Friday, and Saturday before the election, I believe. Walk in, it's just like voting on election day. You sign an affidavit, but it's very simple to do. Take your ID and you can do that. But all of you are probably informed voters, and you're going to walk in knowing how you're going to vote on 7 state questions. There will be people at that polling place that won't know there were 7 state questions until they walked in. And they'll be trying to read them and figure out what they mean and what the legal language is there. And in the meantime, there will be 20 of you standing in line behind 20 of them who are reading all this, knowing how you need to vote. You've got it written down in your cheat sheet, ready to go. So this might be a year to vote early, because with the presidential race and 7 state questions, we actually could have some longer wait times at some of our polling places. Let's start with state question 776. This was one of the questions the legislature placed on the ballot. It is a constitutional amendment, so it adds language to the Constitution regarding capital punishment, or the death penalty. It clarifies that under the Oklahoma Constitution, Oklahoma deems the death penalty to not be cruel and unusual punishment. It makes it clear that the legislature has the authority to determine the methods of execution, whether that's lethal injection or electric chair, firing squad, or asphyxiation. Those are the 4 things that are legal in Oklahoma that are on the books. And in fact, as we started going through this issue with the lethal injection challenges that we had, the Department of Corrections was preparing to dust off and put the electric chair back into use, because that is still on the books. Yeah. Yeah. The purpose of the question is that if one method of execution is ever ruled invalid by a court, so if it's determined that lethal injection is no longer a valid means of carrying out a sentence, the question says that death sentence will remain intact, and that death sentence will be carried out by another valid method. So just because lethal injection is determined to not be a proper use at some point by some court in the future, the death sentence would remain in place. Our executions have been on hold since October of 2015, and reviews have been completed on the protocols, and work is being done to get us back to the point of resuming carrying out those sentences that have been handed down by juries across the state. Again, the purpose is really to reiterate in the state constitution, capital punishment is constitutional in no uncertain terms under the Oklahoma Constitution within our state. Someone couldn't use the Oklahoma Constitution to raise that issue. It also makes it clear that the legislature has the power to determine the methods of execution, and judges don't decide that, whether it's going to be firing squad or lethal injection or whatever it may be. The legislature puts in place what the method would be. And so basically, you would protect the state in its ability to carry out a death sentence against people coming in and filing lawsuits or lobbying the legislature in the future to ensure that the state's still able to provide justice for victims of obviously the most heinous crimes in our state. So everyone always says, well, does that mean I need to vote yes or no? Am I in favor or am I against? If you believe the death penalty should be utilized in Oklahoma, that the state should do everything it can to protect and preserve the ability to sentence those guilty of the most heinous crimes to death, then you would want to vote yes on State Question 776. If you believe the death penalty is not a proper punishment for the most heinous crimes, you don't want to help protect the use of the death penalty by reaffirming it in the state constitution, then you would want to vote no on State Question 776. 777 is probably one no one's heard much about. It's kind of been under the radar. This is another question that was placed on the ballot by the legislature. The House and Senate voted to send this to a vote of the people. It is an amendment to the Constitution. It adds a new section to Article 2 of the Constitution. And the purpose really is, in legal challenges to any law regulating agriculture passed by the legislature after December 31 of 2014. So everything from December 31, 2014 would remain and could not be challenged. But anything passed after that date into the future, courts in the state would be required to apply the highest legal standard, which is often called strict scrutiny, to laws regulating agriculture technology and livestock production and ranching practices. So those are the areas that it would affect. Judges would strike down any laws which are proven not to have a compelling state interest. Everyone's gotten real familiar with that term, and a lot of people are saying, what does that really mean? What is compelling state interest? What will this affect? What will it not? We have what's called an emergency clause that we can attach to a bill at the legislature. And if you get a supermajority of votes, a bill can go into effect upon the governor's signature rather than waiting for a review period. The citizens in Oklahoma have an opportunity, when the legislature passes a law and the governor signs it, to do a petition drive to have a vote on whether they want that law to go into effect or not. Not something that has been used in recent history. Maybe has never been used, I'm not sure. But the language in that emergency clause says it being immediately necessary for the preservation of the public peace, health, or safety. An emergency is hereby declared to exist. That's basically the definition of a compelling state interest. If it affects public peace, health, or safety. Water, air, any of those types of things that we all expect the state to make sure are safe would still be a compelling state interest. And in fact, the legislature even passed a law reaffirming that water indeed, under no uncertain terms, is a compelling state interest. So all of those things would continue to be regulated and could be regulated by state agencies and the legislature, just as they have always been. Nothing would change in those critical areas. But basically the purpose of 777 is to require the courts to apply the same standard to lawsuits concerning agriculture and livestock as they do in free speech, gun ownership, religious freedom, that high standard. Missouri passed this same question in 2014. North Dakota passed it in 2012. No reports of the negative issues that you are hearing from the advertising occurring over the last 4 years or 2 years in either of those states, Missouri or North Dakota. And I think their language is a little more restrictive even than what we are considering here. Supporters argue that passage of the question will allow farmers to defend themselves against unjust laws and regulations passed by a future legislature or put on the ballot through a petition drive by groups like PETA or the Sierra Club or the U.S. Humane Society, groups that are opposed to 777 and have set up some of these groups. They don't use their name, but you'll see Oklahoma Farm Families Against or whatever the names are of the groups that they've established to oppose this question. It would make it more difficult for them in the future. As a new census is taken every 10 years and the urban areas gain legislators, if we continue to lose population in the rural areas, fewer people connected to the farm, it will be easier for them perhaps to be able to impact some of this legislation that they've been able to do in other states, like requiring ranchers to reduce the methane production of their cattle herds by 40%. Well, you can't make your cattle stop passing gas, so there's only one way to do that. That's to get rid of 40% of your herd. And that's the desire of these groups, is to reduce or eliminate animal agriculture. So this would make it more difficult. It doesn't mean that those things can't be done. It just means if they are going to be done in the future, they would have to go to a vote of the people to get those things accomplished, to make additional changes. They couldn't just go lobby the legislature and have a legislature in the future and governor willing to go along. Opponents argue that Oklahomans already have a right to farm, so this amendment really is unnecessary. And that's true. Agriculture is not under attack today by those who serve in the legislature. But again, as I mentioned, as rural communities lose population and legislative seats shift to the urban areas, then 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, it may be a different situation in Oklahoma. So just some things that I think need to be considered. Everybody in this room knows that food doesn't come from the grocery store, where it comes from before it gets to the grocery store. But there are a lot of people now, because we are so now removed from farming, that believe food comes from the grocery store. So all producers affected the same. There's been talk about small producers, family farmers, corporate farms, large acreage farmers. Everyone will be protected. So if it helps a small farmer, it will help a large farmer. There's no difference in terms of the impact that will have. Probably a bigger impact for family farmers who typically wouldn't have the finances to fight the animal rights groups or anti-ag groups who would attack them. So that's just kind of the background on that. If you believe the current rights of Oklahomans to farm and ranch should be preserved for the future, you'd want to vote yes on this question. If you believe that these activist groups from out of state and perhaps a growing number of urban legislators disconnected from agriculture don't pose a threat, and that will be fine, you probably want to vote no on State Question 777. State Question 779 deals with the penny sales tax increase to fund teacher pay raises. And again, I have not taken a position one way or another on this question. I am disappointed on the misinformation that's out there on the question and the reasoning for it. But we have to address teacher salaries in Oklahoma. We have to do something about teacher pay in Oklahoma. The question is a 22% plus increase in the state sales tax the best way to do it, or is there a better way to do it, and the legislature needs to go back to the drawing board and come up with a way to do that. If this question doesn't pass, I think you'll see the legislature address it in some form or fashion, either a stair-step plan like the state superintendent had proposed of $1,000 over 5 years, or maybe it's a $1,500 raise or a $2,500 raise, or whatever it may be that we're able to afford. I think we will see that happen if this question doesn't pass. But that's really the question. I don't think there's much disagreement that we have to get more money into the classroom to teach your salaries. The question is, how do you do that? And do you increase the state sales tax to do it, or do you do it in a different way? And I know most of the city councils and chambers of commerce obviously are opposed. Most of the education groups are in favor, and so it's kind of interesting how this is shaken out. I think it'll be close, and I'm not sure which way it may go. But where my frustration is the talking point that Oklahoma's led the nation in cuts to education since 2008. And that's simply not the case. We haven't made cuts to education. Trivia question. Does anyone remember or know the name of the governor that signed the last budget that was passed by the legislature that reduced funding to schools from the previous year? Brad Henry. Sat in my office this year as we were starting this journey of having $1.3 billion less to spend. And he said, Mr. Speaker, I know you remember this because you were a new legislator, and I was my last year as governor, how hard it was for me, Governor Henry, saying this, to have to sign a budget that reduced spending. But it was the year after the federal stimulus money had run out. The rainy day fund was empty. There was no money left anywhere. And we passed a budget that, Governor Henry's last year in office, that reduced funding to schools from the prior year. That was the last time it happened. So how do these reports come out that you see that report that is the case? There is a group, and it's funded by the George Soros group, but they look at different areas of funding for schools. And you can actually get online and read the actual report rather than just what's on social media. If you look at only our state funding formula, only the amount of money that the legislature appropriates, and you go back to when the recession was beginning, so the higher level before the recession begins, but you only look at that one line item, then Oklahoma has less, a bigger difference there than any other state. But every state funds education differently. And in Oklahoma, we send money to schools from motor vehicle collections, from gross production tax, from the School Land Commission. You start going down the list, there are a lot of other ways that we fund schools. So that is only one piece of the pie. So the chart everyone's familiar with, this is Oklahoma at the top, general funding per student, state general funding, and again, this is per student. We've had some enrollment growth in the state, and that, when you divide by that number, that happens. This is total state K through 12 funding, same report, exact same report. Oklahoma's right here. States that have reduced their funding levels more than Oklahoma since 2008, Arizona, Idaho, Alabama, Florida, Georgia, California, Utah, Texas, Mississippi, and Kansas all have reduced total state funding. When you look at all the money the state sends to schools, which I think is a more accurate snapshot. I'm not suggesting to anyone, if you want to vote to raise the sales tax, you shouldn't vote that way at all. I'm just saying, make an informed decision. The state of Oklahoma, this last year, spent more money on schools than we ever have in the history of our state. And you saw some quotes recently from the state superintendent who mentioned, yes, when you adjust for population growth and other things, that's how you get to this number, but it's not because we've been making cuts to education spending. Education receives 51% of our state budget. When you include higher education and career tech, it's 51% of the budget. Public schools alone get about 36% of the budget, so the overwhelming majority, the biggest area of our budget. By contrast, the Department of Transportation, responsible for the biggest asset the state owns, I believe, is that correct, Commissioner Sutter? The largest asset owned by the state would be our highway system and bridge system. They get 4% of the state budget. Schools get 36% of the state budget. So I tell you that simply to say, your priority, all of our priorities are where we spend the majority of our money. Education is a priority, but enough of that record amount of funding that you're already paying is not getting where it needs to go, which is to the classroom and to teacher salaries, and we have to find a way to address it. Whether it's with this state question, if you choose to pass it, or it's a plan that you ask the legislature to come up with next year if it doesn't pass, the issue is going to have to be addressed in terms of teacher pay. And I think there is a lot of agreement on the need to come up with some plan to do that. The state question also obviously would be beneficial revenue-wise to universities. There's a big chunk of it that goes to higher education. It's not just teacher pay, but higher ed, career tech gets a little piece of it as well. There's an amount that goes to early childhood programs, and so there's a lot of other things in addition to teacher pay. Again, not my job today to come say vote yes or vote no. Just want you to have the information to make an informed decision, and you can vote the way that you choose. But again, if it doesn't pass, I still firmly believe we have to have a plan to address teacher pay in Oklahoma. State question 780 was one of those. In addition to 779, the penny sales tax obviously was put on by a petition drive. 780 and 781 were also put on by a petition drive that gathered signatures from voters in Oklahoma. 780 and 781 are different than all of the other state questions that you'll be voting on. Everything else is a constitutional amendment. 780 and 781 are not. They are statutory changes. That means on all the other questions, if they pass and you want to change them in the future, you have to go back to another vote of the people because they're in the Constitution. These are statutory changes, which means if there are unintended consequences or these things don't work, the legislature can simply vote to change them, and the governor can sign the bill, and they are changed. So these are simply questions going to the citizens of should we change the law, not the Constitution. And again, the legislature, frankly, could change it back if they wanted to, regardless of whether it worked or didn't work. But these are different. 780 and 781 deal with possession of drugs. It would change state law so that possession of illegal drugs would be a misdemeanor instead of a felony. This is simple possession, not manufacturing, trafficking, selling. All of those things would be felonies with long prison terms remaining in effect just as they are. Also make some changes on property crimes. These actually are things that the legislature ended up addressing before the end of the session, but raising the threshold to $1,000 on a property crime for a felony charge and everything under that. It used to be $500, raised it to $1,000 to differentiate between felonies and misdemeanors. This community, probably better than anyone, is aware of our prison situation, the overcrowding in our prisons. We no longer have a career tech program at Bill Johnson. We have people bunked in places that weren't designed to be sleeping space. We're 120% of capacity on any given day, 60 to 70% staff. So something is going to have to change in Oklahoma, whether it's this question or other things. And there are several reforms that will go into place November 1st that the legislature passed to hopefully deal with this issue as well. What this change will mean is that for nonviolent offenses, they would be reclassified as misdemeanors for simple possession. Again, not trafficking, selling, those things, and could have an impact, obviously, on the overcrowded prison population. If that's your position, you want to vote yes on 780. If you think the current classification system on these crimes is appropriate and prison sentences work fine, then you would vote no, and to leave the law as it is today. 781 only goes into effect if voters approve 780. So if you pass 780, 781 goes into effect. If you don't pass 780, 781 is a moot point. But what 781 says is that the cost savings to the state by not having these inmates locked up in state prisons for a long period of time, that cost savings will be returned to each county to have drug treatment, to have mental health treatment, to have job training, education, those things available to hopefully address the root problem and get these people back to their families, back to a job, back to contributing to society. But that money would go to counties, for each county to develop their own program using whatever the cost savings are. So the cost savings wouldn't just go back into the state budget. They would be used for drug and mental health treatment in every county in our state. So if you believe, again on 781, if you believe the cost savings, should 780 pass, should go to mental health and drug treatment, you'd want to vote yes. If you believe that if 780 passes, but the cost savings don't need to be earmarked to counties and they can just be spent by the state in any form they see fit or any area of government, then you'd want to vote no on 780. Wrapping up with 790. 790 and 792 is those are the last two state questions, both constitutional amendments. 790 makes a change in Article 2, Section 5 of the Constitution. This is the change that came from the section of the Constitution that the Supreme Court used to remove the Ten Commandments monument from the Capitol grounds. That's where this issue came from, was to address that. What's called the Blaine Amendment, that was kind of an anti-Catholic provision put in a lot of constitutions around the country many years ago, and this would amend that. A little bit of just general information about this issue. I know one of the things that those opposed have said is, well, this could lead to state money for schools going to religious schools, Catholic schools or Christian schools, something like that. This will have nothing to do with that. If the state of Oklahoma wanted to do that this year, the legislature could pass it and do it, because we're already doing it in higher education. We have a program called OLAP that's been in place for many years in this state, that if a student's parents are below a certain income level, we will pay for them to go to college at any college that they're choosing in Oklahoma, as long as it's in the state. That includes Oklahoma Baptist University, Southern Nazarene University, any university of their choosing, and we write the check and pay the bill now. So that's been going on for decades in Oklahoma, and that issue has not been raised, so I don't think it changes anything there. The other area that it affects, if this isn't changed and someone wants to go challenge that higher ed program, they can also challenge our Medicaid system. St. Anthony Hospital, the Catholic Hospital, St. Mary's, Mercy Hospital, St. Francis. We write checks every month for Medicaid services in religious hospitals around this state. Another reason this is of concern is to make sure we can preserve those programs as well. So again, I think you just have to make a philosophical decision about where you fall on that. But in terms of the reasoning, or the reason maybe to not be for it, don't count that as necessarily one of the reasons, because those things could be done today if you wanted to allow a student to take their money that they normally would use in a public school to use at a private school. We do it already in higher ed, and we do it in healthcare already today. So if you are in favor of making that change and addressing that issue, you'd vote yes. If you want the Constitution left like it is, the Ten Commandment statute's been moved down the street to private property, you want that left where it is, then you'd vote no on 790. The last one, very quickly, and again, there's been a lot of information out on this question, is State Question 792. The legislature voted to put this one on the ballot. It would replace Article 28 of the Constitution, which is the part of the Constitution that regulates alcoholic beverages. The longest Constitution in the country, longer than a lot of countries around the world. The flashpoint of kerosene is in our Constitution. Alcoholic regulations are in our Constitution. There's a lot of things in our Constitution, and maybe some more things going in, that probably shouldn't necessarily be in the Constitution, but alcohol regulation is in the Constitution, so the only way to change it is the people to vote to change the Constitution. This change would impact beer sales and wine sales. It would allow those in grocery stores. It would probably eliminate the existence of 3.2 beer. The industry tells me that they sell more 3.2 beer in Oklahoma than any other state. And so if this changes and we have regular strength beer in Oklahoma, probably other states that have this are going to have to find something else to do, because more than likely manufacturers are going to quit even producing 3.2 beer if Oklahoma makes this change. So it'll be interesting to see how that affects the market. It will allow those products to be sold refrigerated, which would be a change for full strength beer and alcoholic beverages. But again, would allow grocery stores to sell regular beer and wine. If they obtain a license, they would still have to go through the process to obtain a license to sell those things. Liquor stores would then be authorized to sell other products. As you may know, liquor stores can't sell anything else. This would change that to allow them to sell other products, whether that's ice or bottle openers or whatever it is that they might want to sell. It also would allow liquor stores to stay open until midnight instead of being required to close at 9 p.m. under the current regulations. Direct shipment of wine is another provision of this. You would be able to get wine shipped directly to your home if this passes for personal use directly from wineries. There's some limits on the number of cases and those types of things. The interesting part about this state question that most people don't know, if it passes, you're not going to be able to go to Alva's Market and buy regular strength beer or wine until October 21, 2018, if they chose to get a license to do that. It will not go into effect until October 1, 2018, because the industry said they wanted time to get the distribution changed, the stores to have time to adapt for all of this. So even if this question passes, you will not be able to go out and make these purchases in grocery stores or convenience stores until October 1, 2018. So something to keep in mind. ABLE Commission will stay in effect, and we have some of the most restrictive regulations on alcohol in the country. 792 obviously will reduce some of those regulations. But again, arguments on both sides. Should liquor stores have to compete with grocery stores? Should they not? And philosophically, I think you just have to make a decision on where you fall on that, whether you believe competition is proper, or that these laws that have been really since Prohibition have been in place should remain in place. There are businesses that have not come to Oklahoma that claim they will if they're able to sell these items in their stores, and so the potential of attracting more retailers is what supporters are saying. Opponents concerned about increased access to minors if you have alcohol available in more places, and liquor store owners obviously are concerned that it might hurt their business because of having to compete with grocery stores. And so that's kind of the two sides of that coin. But if you believe wine and regular beer should be sold in grocery stores, could be refrigerated, liquor stores should stay open later, sell other things, you would vote yes on 792. If you believe the current restrictions on where and how wine and beer can be sold and are acceptable, you don't want changes made in Oklahoma's alcohol laws, you would vote no on 792. That's a quick thumbnail sketch, and I know we're out of time, and I'll be happy to stay around and answer any questions if there are any. I hope that information's helpful, and if you have questions, please feel free to ask.
How about majority and supermajority? Are there any differences on this?
No, these are all simple majority on all of these questions. Simple majority. And again, 780 and 781 are the only two that are changes in state law, versus all the rest of them are changes to your Constitution. Yes, sir.
Doesn't 792 allow wineries in Oklahoma to export their product?
Well, it allows them to ship, and I don't even know. I mean, they can sell, I believe, out of state now, but they can't ship directly. So if someone visits that winery someone from out of state or in-state, wherever, comes in and says, I like your wine, would you ship a bottle to my house? I'm flying back, or whatever the case may be, they can't do that now. This will allow direct shipment for wineries to ship directly to your home.
Will allow
Terry?
wineries in other states to ship into our state?
I think that's correct. I think because of the Commerce Clause, I don't think we could restrict and just say, that's one of the issues we've dealt with. And the judge could probably explain this better than I can, but I don't think you can have a system that says Oklahoma wineries can do this, but if you're out of state, you can't do that. So I believe it has to apply to everyone, I believe.
Since we're on 792, will the laws governing the hours of sales for convenience stores and grocery stores change with regard to alcohol?
I don't think that. I think the only change in time is allowing liquor stores to stay open later. Again, that's the concern some of the liquor stores have, is that the grocery stores may not be as regulated as what they are. I don't know, and there may be someone here that knows a little more about that. I'd have to read, but I don't know Kelly for sure, but I can find out. Anything else? Thank you all very much for the chance to stop by. It's good to see everyone, and it's been an honor to work with you.